Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Mind. Tonight, we are stepping into a particular hour. Not the dramatic hour of dawn, when bells call the sleepy into the dark and the day announces itself with intention. Not the bright, purposeful hours of morning, when bowls are carried through quiet streets and the work of practice is still fresh and full of resolve. We are stepping into the other end of it, the hour when the light begins to lean, when the shadows in the courtyard grow long and the monastery, having given itself fully to the day, begins its slow, deliberate turn toward rest. The evening in a Buddhist monastery is not simply the absence of morning, it is its own kind of practice, its own architecture. Bells sound again, but softer now. Voices rise again in chanting, but with a different quality, something more like release than beginning. The silence that arrives after the final ceremony of the day is not the same silence as the one before dawn. It is deeper, more inhabited. It carries the weight of everything that has already been lived and set down. There is something here worth settling into, a way of meeting the end of a day that most of the world never quite arrives at, always slightly ahead of where the day actually is, already thinking past it before it has had a chance to close. The monastery has been practicing the art of ending well for over 2,000 years, and tonight it will share a little of what it has learned. If these gentle journeys help you rest, I would love for you to like this video or subscribe to The Sleepy Mind. It helps more tired and curious people find their way here. But for now, let your body grow a little heavier. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day you have been carrying soften at its edges the way the light does at this hour, slowly, without effort, without loss. Let's begin. In most Buddhist monasteries, the boundary between the working day and the evening is not drawn by a clock. There is no screen to check, no notification to receive, no moment at which the external world announces that one phase of the day has concluded and another has begun. Instead, there is a bell, struck once or several times, in a pattern that the community has come to recognize not only with their ears, but with their whole bodies, the way a sleeper recognizes the particular creak of a familiar house and knows without opening their eyes exactly where they are. That bell does something that a clock cannot. It does not divide, it invites. It does not say that the day is over and the evening must now begin. It says, more quietly than that a change is available, that the particular quality of attention the day has required may now be gently set down, and a different quality may be taken up in its place. The monastery does not end one thing abruptly and begin another. It moves between them the way a tide moves, gradually, with a rhythm older than any schedule. The transition into evening is treated in most traditions as a distinct practice moment, deserving the same quality of care as the more obviously significant periods of formal sitting or communal chanting. What happens between the last task of the afternoon and the first bell of the evening is not wasted time. It is preparation, a gentle collecting of the scattered attention that the day's work has spread across kitchens and gardens and corridors, drawing it back toward the interior, the way water drawn up into clouds during the warmth of the afternoon eventually finds its way back to the earth in the quieter hours. In Theravada monasteries, the period after the midday meal and before sunset is sometimes called the afternoon watch, a time of reduced activity and increasing inwardness. The term carries a quality of attentive waiting, of readiness rather than restlessness, a sense that something is arriving, and the wisest response is to be already still when it does. In many Zen monasteries, the transition between the work period and the evening practice is announced by a wooden instrument called the han, a thick plank of hardwood hung near the meditation hall or at the entrance to the main building. The han is struck in a specific sequence, each pattern carrying a distinct meaning that the community has learned over time to distinguish by ear alone. The sound of the han is not melodic in the way that a bell is melodic. It is blunter, more direct, a knock on the door of the present moment, rather than an invitation extended from a distance. Monks who have lived with the han for years describe how its particular sound lodges in the body in a way that is difficult to explain. The pattern enters through the ears, and something in the chest responds, not with urgency, but with recognition, with the quiet knowledge that it is time. In Tibetan monasteries set high in mountain valleys, the transition into evening carries its own particular character. Long horns called dungchen, which can extend to over 3 meters in length, are sometimes sounded at key transitional moments of the day, and the sound they produce is unlike almost anything else the human voice or hand can create. Deep, resonant, and wide enough to fill a valley, the tone of the dungchen does not so much announce a change as embody one. It carries the quality of the shift itself, the deepening of sky toward the blue hour, the cooling of stone that has held the day's warmth, the gradual withdrawing of a world that asks something of the practitioner and is now, slowly, releasing them. In Thailand and Sri Lanka, in forest tradition monasteries where the practice of simplicity is held with particular care, the evening transition often takes the form of a communal gathering to sweep the monastery grounds before the light fades completely. Monks move with brooms across courtyards and stone paths, clearing away the loose debris of the day, not as a chore to be completed before the real work of the evening begins, but as the real work of the evening already underway. The broom moving slowly across stone is not separate from practice. In the understanding of the tradition, it is practice, carrying the same potential for complete attention as any formal sitting. There is something in this that is worth sitting with for a moment, the understanding that the threshold between the working day and the sacred evening is not a door to pass through, but a quality of attention to arrive at. That the sweeping and the bell and the slow withdrawal of light are not the preamble to the evening's practice, but the evening's practice itself, already beginning, already offering what it offers to anyone willing to move at its pace. And so the monastery, having set down its brooms and followed its bells, and turned its face quietly toward the interior, gathers itself for what the evening holds first. The voices rising together in the ancient, unhurried work of chanting. There is a particular quality to voices gathered in a room at the end of a day. Something in the tone is different from the voices that rose before dawn. The morning voices carry possibility, the freshness of a mind not yet marked by hours. The evening voices carry something else, a kind of settled weight, neither heavy nor light, but full in the way that a day fully lived is full, the way a bowl is full when everything placed into it has been received without rejection. Evening chanting occurs in virtually every school of Buddhist monastic life. The texts differ, the language differs, the duration and the setting and the particular way the sound moves through a particular hall all differ from tradition to tradition and monastery to monastery. But the underlying impulse is consistent. At the end of the day, before the great silence arrives, the community gathers its voices and offers them outward, and in the offering, something is returned. In Theravada monasteries across Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia, and Laos, the evening chanting session typically lasts between 30 minutes and 1 hour. Among the most commonly recited texts is the Metta Sutta, a teaching from the Pali Canon, the ancient scriptural collection of the Theravada tradition, that directs the practitioner to extend goodwill to all living beings without exception. The Metta Sutta begins with the near, with those already held in the heart, and then widens outward in concentric circles of concern. The beings nearby, the beings far away, those seen during the day and those never encountered, those understood and those mysterious, those easy to love and those who have made love difficult, all of them, in the words of the chant, included, all of them, in the steady turning of the practitioner's attention, held. There is a quality to chanting the Metta Sutta at the end of a day that feels different from reading its words in the light of an ordinary afternoon. By evening, the day has had its full opportunity to produce its small frictions, the conversation that went slightly sideways, the task that resisted being completed, the moment in which patience was available but not quite reached. The Metta Sutta, offered into that particular hour, meets all of it with a quality of generous retrospection, a gentle redirection of the attention toward what the heart actually wants to feel, rather than what the surface of the day may have left behind. In Zen monasteries following the Soto school, the evening service often includes the chanting of the Sandokai, a text composed in 8th century China by the master Shitu Shikian, which turns its attention to the relationship between difference and unity, between the particularity of each individual thing and the undivided ground from which all particularity arises. To chant the Sandokai at the end of a day in which dozens of individual monks have carried out dozens of individual tasks in dozens of individual corners of the monastery is to locate all of that multiplicity within something that holds it without effort. Tibetan monks bring a different kind of sound to the evening chanting hall. Overtone chanting, a technique in which a single practitioner produces multiple distinct pitches simultaneously by shaping the internal resonance of the throat, chest, and skull cavities in highly specific ways, transforms the single human voice into something that seems to contain more than one person's sound. The training required to produce this kind of chanting reliably takes years. The effect, when heard in a small room with stone walls and dim lamplight, is unlike almost any other sound a human being can make. It does not feel performed. It feels generated, the way a large bell generates sound, not by pushing it outward, but by allowing it to emerge from within. In Korean Zen or Sun monasteries, the evening bell ceremony, known as the Jongdong, is one of the most solemn rituals of the monastic day. A single monk strikes the large hanging bell 108 times as dusk deepens, each strike separated from the next by a measured pause in which the previous tone is still fading and the next has not yet arrived. The 108 strikes correspond to the traditional count of human desires and afflictions, the mental habits and patterns of reaching and avoiding that the practice works over a lifetime to understand and release, heard from within the monastery grounds as the sky shifts from blue to grey to the deep particular darkness of early night. The bell ceremony feels less like a ritual and more like a form of weather. Something passing through, something settling. In virtually every tradition, incense marks the beginning of the evening service. A thin thread of smoke rising from a brazier or a small ceramic holder near the altar, carrying its particular fragrance into the room before the first voice has opened. Incense in East Asian Buddhist traditions is not decorative. It is understood as an offering, a way of signaling to the attention, with something older and more direct than words, that the quality of this time is different from the time surrounding it. That what happens here, in this hall, with these voices and this lamp and this fading light, is held within something larger than the evening's ordinary passage. When the last tone of the last chant has faded back into the walls, and the hall has returned to itself, the quality of the silence that follows carries everything that was offered into it. It is not an empty silence, it is a receiving one. And into that silence, quietly and without announcement, the monastery begins its long evening movement toward rest. Food, in the life of a monastery, is never simply food. From the first moment it is considered, whether in the deliberate acceptance of whatever arrives in the alms bowl, or in the careful preparation of a communal kitchen meal, food is a teacher. It teaches the quality of the practitioner's relationship with wanting. It reveals, in the plainest and most daily of ways, how the mind moves toward what it prefers and away from what it does not, and what becomes possible in the small gap between that movement and the act of simply eating what is present. In the strictest Theravada monasteries, the evening hours pass entirely without eating. This is not a modern dietary choice. It is one of the Vinaya rules, the ancient code of monastic discipline attributed to the Buddha and preserved with remarkable consistency across more than 2,000 years. The Vinaya is the oldest surviving code of monastic regulation anywhere in the world, and the rule about eating only before noon is among its clearest and most consistently observed requirements. Monks in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia, and Laos who follow this code receive everything they need to eat within a window of a few morning hours, and the rest of the day, including the entire evening, is observed without consuming food. For someone arriving at this practice from outside the tradition, the first response is often to imagine hunger, to project onto the monk's evening the particular restlessness of an unmet appetite. But monks who have observed this discipline for years describe something quite different. The absence of food in the evening is experienced not as a deprivation, but as a kind of spaciousness. The body, knowing that it will not be called upon to digest, settles into a particular lightness. The mind, no longer anticipating a meal, releases the low-level planning and preference that meal anticipation quietly generates, and something underneath that noise becomes available. The quiet that was always there, simply waiting for the appetite to step aside. In Mahayana traditions, which include the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Vietnamese schools, monks typically do eat in the evening, though the meal is simple and modest in keeping with the values of non-excess that run through every aspect of monastic life. The understanding is the same even where the practice differs. Food is medicine. It is taken in the amount required to support the body for continued practice, and the quality of attention brought to it is the practice itself. In Chinese Chan monasteries, the evening meal carries the particular name of medicine meal, a designation that echoes through every aspect of how it is received and consumed. Medicine is not taken for pleasure. It is taken with gratitude and precision, exactly as much as the condition requires, and the quality of attention brought to its administration is the measure of one's respect for both the body and the practice the body makes possible. The kitchen in a Japanese Zen monastery is one of the most spiritually charged spaces in the entire compound. The monk assigned to oversee it, called the tenzo, or head cook, holds a position of genuine distinction within the community. The 13th century Japanese Zen teacher Dogen, who brought the Soto school of Zen from China to Japan, and whose influence on Japanese Buddhism can hardly be overstated, dedicated an entire treatise to the spiritual significance of the kitchen role. In the Tenzo Kyokun, his instructions for the cook, Dogen describes the preparation of food as a direct and unmediated expression of the Buddha's way. The vegetables, he writes, are not merely vegetables. The water used to rinse them is not merely water. Everything that passes through the kitchen is the whole of reality expressing itself through one particular form, and the cook who meets it with complete attention is engaging in the deepest available form of practice. In Tibetan monasteries, the evening often includes the preparation and offering of butter lamps. These small flames, fed by clarified yak butter or vegetable oil, are arranged on altar tables and shrine surfaces throughout the monastery, and their light burns through the night, casting a warm, shifting glow across the iconographic paintings called thankas that hang on the walls. Thankas depict Buddhas, bodhisattvas, sacred mandalas, and scenes from Buddhist narratives, and they serve simultaneously as devotional objects and as meditation supports, their rich imagery providing the contemplative mind with a visual anchor for practices involving visualization and inner stillness. The butter lamps are understood in Tibetan tradition as an offering of light. Their flame represents the wisdom that dispels the darkness of ignorance, and the act of tending them, trimming the wicks, replenishing the fuel, arranging them with care, is itself a meditative practice. A monk who pauses to light a butter lamp at the close of the day is doing something that monks in that same tradition have done in that same way for centuries. The gesture is small. Its reach extends very far. Whether the evening includes a meal or its deliberate absence, what the monastery understands in either case is the same. The body requires care. The quality of that care reflects and shapes the quality of the mind. And the mind, having been fed or having rested in the particular clarity of not being fed, turns its attention now toward the formal practice that the evening holds at its center. If the monastery has a spine, it is the meditation hall. Everything else, the kitchen, the garden, the chanting hall, the pathways between buildings, the small sleeping quarters with their simple mats, organizes itself around this central space in the way that a body organizes itself around its central axis. The meditation hall is not the most impressive room. It is often not even the largest. But it is the room toward which the day, in all its variety and texture, is consistently moving, and the evening session that takes place within it is, in many traditions, the most extended and most deeply attended period of formal practice that the monastic day contains. Formal evening meditation is observed across all major schools of Buddhist monasticism. The form it takes, the posture, the technique, the duration, the silence or the sound that accompanies it, varies considerably from one tradition to another and from one monastery to another within a single tradition. But the underlying understanding is consistent. The mind has been active throughout the day. It has moved through tasks and interactions and moments of difficulty and moments of unexpected ease. The evening session is an opportunity to return it to itself, to allow the surface of things to settle, the way silt settles in a jar of water when the jar is finally held still. In Theravada forest monasteries, the evening meditation period often begins after the chanting service and may continue well into the night. The Thai forest tradition, established in the early 20th century by the revered monk Ajahn Mun, holds a particular respect for the late-night hours as a time of especially favourable conditions for deepened practice. Ajahn Mun himself was known to meditate through entire nights, and the quality of that commitment was passed down through his lineage with the intimacy of lived example rather than written instruction. His students, among them Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Buddhadasa, carried the same understanding forward into their own communities and into the communities those communities eventually generated. The practice deepens at night. The distractions are minimal. The world outside the monastery walls has set down its business. And in that stillness, the practitioner can meet what is ordinarily obscured by the noise of ordinary hours. In Zen monasteries, the evening sitting is often the longest formal meditation of the day. During ordinary periods in the monastic calendar, it may last between 45 minutes and 2 hours. During intensive training periods called sesshin, a Japanese word that translates roughly as to collect or unify the mind, the evening sitting may extend to 10 or 11 at night, with monks returning to their sleeping quarters for only a few hours before the pre-dawn bell calls them back. Sesshin typically lasts between 5 and 7 days, occurring several times across the monastic year, and represents the most condensed and demanding expression of Zen's commitment to the practice of sustained attention. The discomfort is real. The knees protest, the back tightens. The mind, when it can no longer seek entertainment in the external world, turns inward and begins to encounter itself with an honesty that comfort rarely requires. In Tibetan monasteries, the evening hours are often devoted to visualization practices, meditative techniques of considerable complexity, involving detailed and sustained mental imagery. The practitioner visualizes a specific deity, landscape, or mandala with a clarity and stability that ordinary thinking cannot produce, holding the image in the mind with the same quality of precise attention that a skilled calligrapher brings to a single brushstroke. These are not daydreams. They require years of patient training, beginning with the simplest forms and gradually introducing complexity as the capacity for sustained attention develops. The transmission of visualization practices from teacher to student occurs through a formal ceremony called an empowerment, or wang in Tibetan, in which the student receives not only the instructions, but the living transmission of the practice lineage itself. In Burmese Theravada monasteries following the tradition of the late Mahasi Sayadaw, one of the 20th century's most influential meditation teachers, The evening hours often include a distinctive form of walking meditation, in which movement is slowed to a degree that seems, from the outside, almost impossibly deliberate. Each step is broken into as many as 6 distinct components, each one observed with precise mental noting. The lifting of the heel, the rising of the foot, the moving forward, the lowering, the pressing of the sole against the ground, the transferring of weight, each component named internally as it occurs, the noting practice working like a searchlight, sweeping across the moment's contents and illuminating what would otherwise pass unobserved. The practice requires patience of a kind that initially seems beyond reach and then, gradually, becomes its own quiet pleasure. What all of these forms share, across their considerable differences of technique and tradition and cultural context, is the quality of intention that underlies them. The monk who sits in the dim light of a meditation hall at 9 in the evening, an hour at which the rest of the world has largely given itself over to entertainment or distraction, is engaged in something that requires and produces a particular quality of presence. Not the alert urgency of morning practice, or the wide-open attention of the arms round. Something quieter than either. A settling into the practice that has been developing across the whole of the day, patient and steady, like the deepening of colour in a sky moving slowly toward full dark. That colour, that quality of deepening, carries the practitioner not only through the formal session, but through what arrives on its other side, the particular silence that the evening is always, in the end, preparing them to inhabit. There is a form of quiet that is not merely the absence of noise. It has a texture, a presence, something that can be entered and inhabited rather than simply waited out. Monks who have lived with extended silence for years consistently describe it in these terms, pointing towards something that language can approach but not fully hold. And it is this quality of silence, the silence with substance, that the evening in a monastery is, in a very real sense, organized around producing. In many Buddhist monasteries, an extended period of silence is observed from the close of the evening service until after morning chanting the following day. This stretch of approximately 10 to 12 unbroken hours is sometimes called the Great Silence, a phrase that appears in monastic traditions far beyond Buddhism, including certain Christian contemplative orders, pointing to a recognition that appears to arise independently across cultures and centuries, that there is something available in extended silence that shorter quiet cannot provide, that the mind, given enough uninterrupted stillness, moves through its ordinary repertoire of thought and commentary and preference into something underneath all of that, something that the noise of daily life covers rather than creates. The great silence is not only an absence of speech, it includes the cessation of unnecessary movement, the setting aside of reading that is not directly connected to practice, and the general quieting of any activity that does not serve the purposes of rest, meditation, or preparation for sleep. It is, in the fullest sense of the phrase, a closing of the day, a deliberate and unhurried completion, the way a musician does not simply stop playing, but brings the piece to its natural conclusion, holding the final note until the room has absorbed it entirely. In Zen monasteries, the great silence is observed with particular strictness. Speech during this period is not reduced, it is absent. Even non-verbal communication, gestures and facial expressions that in ordinary social life carry much of the weight of conversation, is minimized. Monks move through corridors in genuine quiet, the kind of quiet that requires no enforcement, because those who have chosen to be here have also chosen what the choosing entails. For monks in their first weeks or months at a monastery, this aspect of monastic life is often described as among the most challenging, not because of any physical discomfort, but because of what happens inside the silence. The mind, accustomed to the social world's continuous offering of distraction and response, does not immediately settle when the noise is removed. It generates its own. Old conversations replay. Future conversations are rehearsed. Opinions form and dissolve and reform. The entire apparatus of the social self, which exists largely in language and is maintained by language, discovers that it has been given an evening off and does not quite know what to do with the freedom. But something shifts, given enough time and enough evenings. The mind moves through its repertoire and reaches the end of it. The rehearsed conversations are completed and not replaced. The opinions surface and, finding no audience, release. And in the space that opens when the mind has exhausted its habitual commentary, something else becomes audible. Senior monks describe it differently in different traditions, but the quality they are pointing toward is recognizable across the differences. Not silence as deprivation, silence as presence, something to rest in rather than against. The great silence is also, practically and physiologically, an extraordinary gift to the nervous system. The constant low-level stimulation of social interaction, even interaction that is calm and pleasant, requires effort. The attention must be managed. The self must be calibrated and maintained. The great silence removes all of that for 10 hours every night, giving the entire relational machinery of the human mind the opportunity to rest in a way that sleep alone cannot provide. Monks who have lived inside this rhythm for years tend to carry a quality of stillness that is visible without being easy to name. Something in the pace, the quality of listening, the absence of the slight urgency that social life generates almost everywhere else. In some Tibetan monasteries, the great silence is less formally structured than in Zen or Theravada communities. The monastery does not announce the silence with a ceremony or a bell. It simply becomes quiet in the way that mountain landscapes become quiet at nightfall, gradually and completely, the sound withdrawing not all at once, but in layers, until what remains is not emptiness, but the particular fullness of a world that has stopped performing and is simply present. And it is inside that fullness, that deeply inhabited quiet, that the evening's last formal practices take place. There is a form of quiet that is not merely the absence of noise. It has a texture, a presence, something that can be entered and inhabited rather than simply waited out. Monks who have lived with extended silence for years consistently describe it in these terms, pointing towards something that language can approach but not fully hold. And it is this quality of silence, the silence with substance, that the evening in a monastery is, in a very real sense, organized around producing. In many Buddhist monasteries, an extended period of silence is observed from the close of the evening service until after morning chanting the following day. This stretch of approximately 10 to 12 unbroken hours is sometimes called the Great Silence, a phrase that appears in monastic traditions far beyond Buddhism, including certain Christian contemplative orders, pointing to a recognition that appears to arise independently across cultures and centuries. That there is something available in extended silence that shorter quiet cannot provide. That the mind, given enough uninterrupted stillness, moves through its ordinary repertoire of thought and commentary and preference into something underneath all of that. Something that the noise of daily life covers rather than creates. The great silence is not only an absence of speech, it includes the cessation of unnecessary movement, the setting aside of reading that is not directly connected to practice, and the general quieting of any activity that does not serve the purposes of rest, meditation, or preparation for sleep. It is, in the fullest sense of the phrase, a closing of the day. A deliberate and unhurried completion, the way a musician does not simply stop playing, but brings the piece to its natural conclusion, holding the final note until the room has absorbed it entirely. In Zen monasteries, the great silence is observed with particular strictness. Speech during this period is not reduced, it is absent. Even non-verbal communication, gestures and facial expressions that in ordinary social life carry much of the weight of conversation, is minimized. Monks move through corridors in genuine quiet, the kind of quiet that requires no enforcement, because those who have chosen to be here have also chosen what the choosing entails. For monks in their first weeks or months at a monastery, this aspect of monastic life is often described as among the most challenging, not because of any physical discomfort, but because of what happens inside the silence. The mind, accustomed to the social world's continuous offering of distraction and response, does not immediately settle when the noise is removed. It generates its own. Old conversations replay. Future conversations are rehearsed. Opinions form and dissolve and reform. The entire apparatus of the social self, which exists largely in language and is maintained by language, discovers that it has been given an evening off and does not quite know what to do with the freedom. But something shifts, given enough time and enough evenings. The mind moves through its repertoire and reaches the end of it. The rehearsed conversations are completed and not replaced. The opinions surface and, finding no audience, release. And in the space that opens when the mind has exhausted its habitual commentary, something else becomes audible. Senior monks describe it differently in different traditions, but the quality they are pointing toward is recognizable across the differences. Not silence as deprivation, silence as presence, something to rest in rather than against. The great silence is also, practically and physiologically, an extraordinary gift to the nervous system. The constant low-level stimulation of social interaction, even interaction that is calm and pleasant, requires effort. The attention must be managed. The self must be calibrated and maintained. The great silence removes all of that for 10 hours every night, giving the entire relational machinery of the human mind the opportunity to rest in a way that sleep alone cannot provide. Monks who have lived inside this rhythm for years tend to carry a quality of stillness that is visible without being easy to name. Something in the pace, the quality of listening, the absence of the slight urgency that social life generates almost everywhere else. In some Tibetan monasteries, the great silence is less formally structured than in Zen or Theravada communities. The monastery does not announce the silence with a ceremony or a bell. It simply becomes quiet in the way that mountain landscapes become quiet at nightfall, gradually and completely, the sound withdrawing not all at once, but in layers, until what remains is not emptiness, but the particular fullness of a world that has stopped performing and is simply present. And it is inside that fullness, that deeply inhabited quiet, that the evening's last formal practices take place. Some forest tradition monks in Southeast Asia maintain walking meditation paths that extend into the surrounding jungle, where the practice takes on a different character entirely. The forest floor is not smooth or even. Roots cross the path. The light, already dim at dusk, filters through canopy in unpredictable ways. Sounds arrive from directions and distances that are difficult to locate precisely. The practitioner is walking through a living system that does not organize itself around their presence. And the practice, in that context, is not only about there is a particular quality of light that appears for only a short time each evening, and those who have spent their lives paying attention to such things have given it careful notice. The hour of dusk is not simply a transition between day and night. It is a condition in its own right. The light softens in a way that has no equivalent in the rest of the day. Shadows lose their sharp edges. Colours shift toward the cooler end of their range. The world becomes, briefly, something between a thing seen and a thing felt, the visual and the contemplative meeting at the horizon in a way they rarely manage during the brighter hours. Monks across many traditions have recognized this quality and built their practice around it. Evening walking meditation is not an afterthought. It is not what happens when the meditation hall is full, or when the sitting has gone on long enough that the body requires a change of position. It is a practice with its own conditions and its own rewards, and the dusk hour offers it something that no other part of the day can quite provide. Many monasteries have dedicated walking meditation paths that carry the particular smoothness of having been used in the same way, slowly and repeatedly, for very long periods of time. In Thai and Sri Lankan Theravada monasteries, these paths are often marked at either end by a small stone or a low border, providing a clear boundary for the back and forth movement of the practice. The ground of the path itself, worn smooth by years of slow footsteps, carries a different texture underfoot from the surrounding garden. Walking it for the first time, there is the immediate and uncomplicated sense of joining something that was already in motion long before one's own arrival. In Japanese Zen monasteries, the walking meditation practice called kinhin is performed between seated periods and is understood as continuous with them rather than separate from them. The practitioner moves at a pace somewhat faster than Theravada-style walking, each step coordinated with a half-breath, the attention sustained in exactly the same quality of collected awareness that the sitting period developed. Kinhin in the Zen context is performed in a single-file line, the practitioners circling the meditation hall in a slow, deliberate procession, each one close enough to the person ahead to maintain the sense of collective practice, while far enough apart to maintain the integrity of individual attention. Quality of attention applied to the foot touching the ground, but about the quality of receptivity brought to a world that is indifferent to the walker in the most nourishing possible sense. What all of these forms of evening walking share is the understanding that the body in motion is not a break from practice, but a continuation of it. That awareness is not something that happens only when the body is still. That the foot placed with full attention on the ground of a worn stone path or a forest floor is as complete an expression of the practice as any moment spent in formal sitting. And when the walking is complete, when the path has been traversed the required number of times, and the body has been returned to the stillness from which it began, what remains is a quality of gathered attention, ready for what the evening still has to offer. After the communal ceremonies of the evening have been completed, after the chanting has returned to silence and the meditation period has drawn its gentle close, many monastic traditions offer something that the structured parts of the day cannot provide. A period of unscheduled time, open to individual use, in which the particular practice of each particular monk may continue in whatever direction the moment requires. This personal time is not vacation. It is not leisure in the sense of distraction or entertainment. It is something closer to the kind of practice that happens between formal sessions, when the formal structure has been set aside and the practitioner is left with what they have actually developed, rather than what the schedule has been providing. A musician who has spent the day in ensemble rehearsal and structured technique work comes home in the evening to play freely, not to abandon what was practiced, but to discover what has genuinely been absorbed. The personal evening hour in a monastery serves something similar. It is where the day's practice, having been offered in all of its formal and structured forms, begins to settle into the person actually doing it. Theravada communities tend to regard this personal time as particularly significant because the Theravada tradition places considerable emphasis on the individual's direct relationship with their own experience as the primary vehicle of understanding. No teacher, no tradition, and no communal ceremony, however beneficial, can do the final work of the practice on behalf of the individual practitioner. That work happens in the private hours, in the quiet interior of a single mind, meeting its own contents without intermediary. Some monks use the personal evening hours to write, not for publication or for any external audience, but as a form of reflection. A journal of practice in which the observations and difficulties and small moments of unexpected clarity that arose during the day are recorded not for the purpose of preserving them, but for the purpose of meeting them one more time, more slowly, before releasing them into the night. Writing in this context is a form of meditation by another means. The hand moving across the page at the pace of considered thought. The mind given the opportunity to revisit what it noticed and to find, in the revisiting, something it missed on first encounter. In Tibetan Buddhism, the personal evening hours are often given to the practice of mantra recitation. A mantra is a short phrase or sequence of syllables understood in the tradition as carrying concentrated spiritual energy, and the practice of repeating it many hundreds or thousands of times on a string of prayer beads, called a mala, is considered particularly effective for purifying the mental impressions accumulated during the day and for setting the mind in a wholesome orientation before rest. A standard Tibetan Buddhist mala contains 108 beads, the same number as the morning bell strikes in Japanese Zen, and the traditional count of human desires and afflictions, creating across very different practices a kind of numerical continuity that is not quite coincidental. The sound of mantra recitation at night carries a quality that is distinct from its sound during the bright hours of the day. The voice drops lower, the pace slows. The repetitions accumulate not as effort, but as something more like breathing, each cycle arriving without particular announcement and passing without particular note. The hand moves along the beads. The bead is smooth under the fingers. The voice continues. And beneath the voice, something settles. In Vietnamese Zen or Tien monasteries, the personal evening hours sometimes hold the practice of calligraphy. This is not an artistic exercise in the sense of a craft practiced for its own aesthetic rewards, though beauty is certainly present in the finest examples. Calligraphy in the East Asian Buddhist context is understood as a direct expression of the practitioner's inner state at the moment of writing. The brush and the ink and the paper do not mediate between the mind and the mark on the page. They transmit it. A practitioner whose mind is agitated and unsteady will produce brushwork that shows it, not as a representation of that agitation, but as its immediate trace. And a practitioner whose mind has been calmed and collected through a day of practice will bring that quality to the brush as naturally as they bring it to the quality of their footstep. In some Japanese Zen monasteries, the personal evening hours may be spent reading the records of classical Zen teachers, accounts of the lives and teachings of the Tang and Song dynasty masters, whose encounters and sayings form the foundation of Zen's literary tradition. These are not texts read for information or for entertainment. They are texts read for contact, for the quality of mind that lives between their lines and can be felt, in the personal quiet of an evening room, as something more than historical. What all of these private practices share is the quality of solitude that surrounds them, a solitude that is not loneliness, because the practitioner is held within a community and within a tradition that extends far beyond any single evening's silence, a solitude that is, rather, the condition in which the most interior work of the practice can take place, the work that no bell can announce and no ceremony can carry, the work that happens when the day is nearly over and the person doing the practice is alone with whatever they have actually become. Among all the forms that practice takes in the life of a monastery, there is perhaps none that carries quite the concentrated intensity of a private meeting between a student and their teacher. Everything else, the sitting and the chanting and the walking and the communal work, can be done in the comfortable anonymity of the group. The private interview removes that anonymity entirely. It brings the practitioner alone, before someone who knows them not through social acquaintance, but through the sustained, patient witness of practice over time. And it asks them, in that unshielded encounter, to demonstrate not what they know, but what they have actually become. In Zen monasteries, the private interview between student and teacher is called dokusan, a Japanese word meaning roughly, going alone to a senior. The dokusan room is typically small and spare, a cushion for the teacher, a mat for the student, perhaps a small altar with a candle, nothing that the attention could rest on easily, no visual complexity to offer refuge from the simplicity of the encounter itself. The approach to the dokusan room is itself a practice. A bell announces that the teacher is available, and monks gather in the corridor to wait their turn. The atmosphere in that corridor is not casual. The quality of attention is different from the attention brought to communal sitting, not higher necessarily, but more concentrated, more pointed, the way light concentrated through a lens becomes capable of things that diffuse light cannot produce. Monks approach one at a time, and what happens between the student and the teacher in those few minutes is understood to be among the most direct expressions of transmission available within the tradition. In Rinzai Zen, the Dokusan encounter typically involves the student's presentation of their work with a koan, a paradoxical question or phrase used as a meditation object. Classic koan collections, including the Mumonkan, or Gateless Gate, and the Hekigan Roku, or Blue Cliff Record, were compiled in China during the Song dynasty and contain exchanges between ancient teachers and their students that have been used in formal training ever since. The koan is not a puzzle to be solved by cleverness. It is a question that requires the entire person, not the thinking portion of them, to respond. A student who approaches the koan with intellectual strategy will find, in the Dokusan room, that the teacher is unmoved, and a student whose sitting has brought them into genuine contact with the question will find, in the same room, that the teacher recognizes it immediately. The response of the teacher in Dokusan, which may be a question, a silence, a gesture, a swift and firm rejection, or something that the student did not anticipate and cannot immediately interpret, is not a judgment of the student's character or a measure of their worth. It is a precise response to their current state of practice, offered with the intent of moving that practice forward in the most direct available way. A teacher who rejects a student's presentation is not dismissing the student. They are pointing toward what has not yet been reached and inviting continued effort. This distinction between dismissal and pointing is one of the things that takes time to understand, and the understanding of it is itself part of the practice. In Theravada communities, the equivalent of this encounter is less formally structured. A monk who has a question arising from their practice may approach a senior teacher in the evening hours, sit with them quietly, and raise what needs to be raised. The conversation that follows is gentle in tone and unhurried in pace. The teacher does not perform. The student does not perform. What happens between them is simply the meeting of one practitioner's experience with another's longer perspective, and the exchange is as likely to include long silences as words. In Tibetan monasteries, the relationship between a student and their primary teacher, called the Lama, is considered among the most sacred and significant of a practitioner's life. One-on-one instruction from a Lama is not given casually. It is received in the context of a relationship that may have been developing for years, built on the student's demonstrated commitment to foundational practice, and the weight of what is transmitted in those private meetings is understood to extend well beyond what the words alone could carry. What all of these encounters share, across their considerable differences in form and tradition, is the understanding that the practice ultimately requires a witness. Not because the practitioner cannot trust their own experience, but because the human mind has a remarkable capacity to mistake the familiar for the understood, and the teacher, having travelled further along the path, can see what the student cannot yet see from where they stand. The evening interview is where that sight is offered. Quietly, precisely, and without sentimentality, there is a gesture that the human body makes in certain moments, a lowering of itself toward the ground, a releasing of height and the particular authority that upright posture carries, that is found across cultures and centuries in the presence of what is held as sacred. In Buddhist monastic life, this gesture is formalized and practiced with deliberate attention. It is not a performance of devotion for any observer's benefit. It is the body being used as a vehicle for a quality of mind that cannot be produced by the mind acting alone. Evening prostrations are a common devotional practice in Tibetan, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese Buddhist communities. A full prostration involves lowering the entire body to the ground so that the forehead, forearms, and knees are all in simultaneous contact with the floor. The hands may be held in a specific position as they touch the earth, palms upward, representing the offering of everything one has and is. The body rises and the sequence begins again. In this way, the gesture of complete humility and the body's act of rising become a single continuous movement, a visual expression of something that all Buddhist traditions, in their different ways, are pointing toward. The capacity to release and the capacity to continue are not opposites. In Korean Sun monasteries, the evening practice of 108 full prostrations is performed with the same quality of collected attention that is brought to formal sitting and walking meditation. One prostration for each of the 108 beads on a mala. One gesture of complete release for each of the 108 traditional human afflictions. The practice takes approximately 30 to 45 minutes when performed at a mindful pace, and the physical demand it makes is genuine. The muscles of the legs and back and shoulders are engaged in a way that sitting does not require. The cardiovascular system is addressed. Perspiration arrives. And through all of that physical reality, the attention is asked to remain steady, gathered, and clear, which is precisely what makes it a practice rather than simply exercise. In Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of prostration is woven into the very foundation of formal training through a set of preliminary practices called ngondro. Among the requirements of ngondro is the completion of 100,000 full prostrations, a commitment that in a monastic context is distributed across months of daily evening sessions. 100,000 prostrations. The number is not symbolic in the way that smaller numbers sometimes are. It is a physical and temporal reality, requiring the body to make the gesture of complete release so many times that the gesture eventually ceases to feel like something undertaken and begins to feel like something simply done, the way breathing is done, without the weight of decision. In Chinese Chan monasteries, evening prostrations are often performed alongside the recitation of the names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the awakened beings of the Mahayana tradition, whose qualities of wisdom and compassion are invoked as objects of aspiration and devotion. Among the most widely venerated of these figures is Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, known in the Sanskrit tradition as Avalokiteshvara, whose name in Chinese carries the meaning of one who perceives the sounds of the world. To prostrate before an image of Guanyin in the evening, reciting her name with each gesture, is understood not as worship in the theological sense, but as a training of the attention toward the quality of compassion itself. The gesture and the name and the image and the aspiration become, in the repetition, a single, undivided act. In some Japanese Zen monasteries, a particular form of walking prostration is practiced, in which the monk takes 3 steps forward and then lowers their entire body to the floor before rising and repeating the sequence across the full length of the hall. The movement is extraordinarily slow. What would ordinarily be a 10-second walk across a room becomes a practice of 20 minutes or more. And in that expansion of time, In the space that the slowness creates between one step and the next, something is asked of the attention that ordinary pace does not require. What is asked in all of these forms of prostration is the release of something. The height, the authority, the self-sufficiency of the upright posture are not permanent achievements. They are positions that the body holds temporarily, on loan from the same ground to which they are periodically, gratefully, and completely returned. Long before electricity reached the monasteries of Asia, the management of light was already understood as a practice. The quality of light in a space shapes the quality of mind that is available in it. Bright, hard-edged light holds the attention outward, keeping it engaged with the surface of things, with detail and distinction, and the constant visual information of a fully illuminated room. Soft, warm, flickering light does something different. It softens the boundary between the seen and the imagined. It draws the attention inward. It creates the conditions in which a certain quality of reflective stillness becomes available that the brighter hours cannot easily produce. In most traditional Buddhist monasteries across Asia, the evening is accompanied by oil lamps, candles, or butter lamps, rather than bright overhead light, and in many communities, this preference has been maintained even where electric light is available. The choice is not sentimental. It is practical in the oldest sense of the word, serving the actual purpose for which the evening practices exist. The management of the monastery's lights in the evening hours is entrusted to specific members of the community, and the ceremonial extinguishing of certain lamps or candles at the close of the evening service is understood as a ritual act rather than simply a maintenance task. When the monk responsible for the lamps moves through the darkening hallways and shrine rooms at the end of the day, the small flame that disappears under each pinched finger is not merely a flame going out. It is a small and deliberate closing, a moment of acknowledged transition between the evening's activity and the night's rest. In Tibetan monasteries, the butter lamp altar can be a genuinely extraordinary sight. Arrays of dozens or hundreds of small flames arranged on altar tables, each one representing a prayer or an aspiration. The warm light they cast together, shifting and moving across the surfaces of the thangka paintings that cover the walls. Thangkas, those richly detailed cloth paintings depicting Buddhas and sacred landscapes, and the complex iconography of Tibetan Buddhist practice, are designed to be viewed by the light of butter lamps. The pigments used in their painting were chosen with this light in mind. The warm golden quality of the flame brings out colours and levels of detail that daylight treats differently, and the slight movement of the light gives the painted figures a quality of presence that stillness would not produce. There is something about a butter lamp that deserves more than passing attention. It is, in the most literal sense, a flame sustained by offering. The clarified butter or vegetable oil that feeds it has been given for this purpose, and the lamp burns in testimony to that giving. Monks who tend butter lamp altars as part of their regular duties describe the practice of refilling and trimming the lamps as one of the most quietly satisfying forms of work the monastery offers. The hands engaged in something simple, purposeful, and beautiful. The mind given a single point of warmth around which to settle. The room becoming, in the gathering of many small flames, something that a single lamp could not produce. In Theravada monasteries, where monks are not permitted to handle money and depend entirely on lay supporters for materials including lamp oil and candles. The presence of light in the monastery at night is itself a visible expression of the relationship between the monastic community and the lay people who support it. Each small flame burning on an altar at 9 in the evening was provided by someone outside the monastery walls, someone whose generosity made it possible for the practice inside those walls to continue in this particular form. The light, in that sense, represents community extending across the boundary of the monastery's physical space. The gradual dimming of the monastery as the evening deepens toward full night is not a failure of illumination. It is a purposeful alignment of the external environment with the internal movement the evening is designed to support. The body, meeting darkness rather than light as it moves toward rest, receives a signal that the entire nervous system has been calibrated across millions of years to respond to. The day is ending. Activity is concluding. The particular quality of alert, outward attention that light supports may now be gently set aside. And in that gentle dimming, that gradual return of the monastery to the dark from which the morning bell will eventually call it again, the deepest practice of the evening becomes available. Most of the world treats sleep as an interruption, something that happens to the day rather than something that belongs to it. A necessary pause between the real activities of waking life, regrettable in its duration and managed with varying degrees of resistance depending on the urgency of what remains undone. The monastery's understanding of sleep is almost entirely different. Sleep, in monastic life, is not the end of practice. It is its continuation in another form. In Theravada teachings, the state of falling asleep is sometimes compared to the moment of death, not in a frightening or morbid sense, but in a precise and practical one. Both involve the releasing of the ordinary, constructed, day-lit sense of self. Both require a quality of surrender that the controlled, managed, goal-oriented mind finds uncomfortable. And both, in the Theravada understanding, offer an opportunity for a particular quality of mindful awareness to be present at a threshold that most people cross without consciousness, carried across by the ordinary momentum of tiredness. Some Theravada monks practice what is called sleeping in mindfulness, a practice of establishing a quality of aware attention as the body settles into its sleeping posture and maintaining that quality as long as possible as sleep approaches. The posture recommended for this practice is the right side of the body lying downward, a position known in Pali as the lion's posture, the same posture in which the Buddha is traditionally depicted in images of his parinibbana, his final passing into complete nirvana. This posture is considered to support a lighter, less restless quality of sleep and a more aware quality of waking, and monks who practice it describe the transition into sleep as something that happens naturally and gently when the attention has been held steadily enough, the way a candle flame settles when the room around it is finally still. In Tibetan Buddhism, the relationship between sleep and practice reaches its most elaborate expression in the teaching known as dream yoga. Dream yoga is the practice of maintaining a subtle form of awareness through the dream state, of recognizing the dream as a dream while it is occurring, and of using that recognition as an insight into the nature of mind itself. The logic of the practice is precise and demanding. If the practitioner can recognize the dream as a dream, that recognition demonstrates a quality of awareness that is independent of the dream's content, of all the vivid, convincing, emotionally compelling imagery that the dreaming mind produces. And if awareness can be independent of the dream's content, then it may also be independent of the waking mind's content. The boundary between what is constructed and what is aware, between the show and the one watching it, becomes visible in the dreaming state in a way that ordinary waking consciousness makes difficult. Dream yoga is considered an advanced practice within the Tibetan completion stage tantric tradition, not available to practitioners who have not first developed a stable and reliable quality of waking mindfulness. The preparation required takes years. The practice itself, when it becomes accessible, is described by those who have genuinely developed it as among the most direct available demonstrations of the mind's fundamental nature. A monastery at night is not, in the Tibetan understanding, a place where practice has stopped. It is a place where practice has entered its subtlest domain. In the Tibetan classical literature, the period between waking and sleep is given a specific name. It is called the bardo of sleep, one of a series of transitional states described in detail in Tibetan texts on the nature of consciousness and its movement between the major landmarks of existence. The word bardo, often translated as between state or transitional state, points toward the understanding that the spaces between the more obvious, solidly identified phases of experience are not empty transitions, but occasions in their own right, carrying specific qualities and specific opportunities for recognition that the more established states do not offer. In some Japanese Zen monasteries, monks sleep in their meditation robes and are trained to rise at the sound of the morning bell with a quickness and a quality of presence that the evening's practice is designed to support. The transition from sleep to waking is treated as continuous with the practice of the night, not as an interruption of it, and the quality of that transition is understood to reflect the quality of the awareness that was present as sleep arrived. A monastery at night has a particular quality that no description quite captures and no photograph can hold. It is not only visual, it is not primarily visual. It is something that arrives through several senses simultaneously and is composed as much of what is absent as of what is present. The absence of vehicles, the absence of electronic sound, the absence of the particular texture of human social noise, conversation and laughter, and the ambient hum of a world engaged in endless transaction with itself. What remains when all of that is removed is not nothing. It is something that needs to be listened to with a kind of patience that ordinary life rarely requires. Buddhist monasteries at night produce a soundscape that monks come to know with the intimacy of long familiarity. The sound of wind moving through trees or across open stone courtyards. The sound of water, whether in a garden stream or simply in the slow movement of temperature through old plumbing. The sound of the building itself, the subtle settling of wood and stone as the temperature of the night deepens. These are not background sounds, not sounds that go unheard beneath the more important sounds of human activity. In a monastery at night, they are the primary sounds. They are what the environment is actually saying, and monks who have spent years listening to them describe a quality of information carried in that natural acoustic that remains permanently unavailable to those who have never been quiet enough to hear it. In many East Asian monasteries, A wooden instrument called the mokugyo, meaning wooden fish, is used during chanting services and occasionally during meditation periods. The mokugyo is carved from a single piece of hardwood into a rounded fish-like form and struck with a padded mallet to produce a resonant hollow tone that carries well in enclosed spaces without becoming harsh or intrusive. The fish shape carries a traditional significance connected to the fish's quality of keeping its eyes open at all times, even in sleep, which in the Buddhist context is understood as a symbol for the quality of continuous wakefulness that practice is attempting to cultivate. To strike the wooden fish in the evening, in the context of chanting practice, is to invoke that quality directly, with the body's most immediate form of symbol making. In Japanese monasteries, the large hanging bell, known as the bonsho, is among the most significant acoustic presences in the monastery's day. Cast from bronze and sometimes weighing several tons in larger temple complexes, the bonsho is designed to produce a tone of extraordinary sustain. When struck, it does not ring sharply and then stop. It rises, peaks, and then fades over a period of many seconds, the sound growing thinner and thinner without losing its essential quality until it arrives at a threshold where it is no longer quite sound and not quite silence, a boundary that is genuinely difficult to locate, and that the ear, given enough patience, learns to inhabit with a quality of attention it does not otherwise have occasion to develop. The sound of the bonsho at the close of the evening ceremony, moving out from the monastery into the surrounding darkness, reaching whatever is near enough to receive it, is described by monks and visitors alike as one of the most moving acoustic experiences available anywhere in the world. Not because of its volume or its impressiveness, but because of the quality of presence it carries. A tone that was made by human hands, but that, in its fading, releases all of the intention behind its making and becomes simply sound, dissolving into simply silence, which is, in a precise and non-dramatic way, a demonstration of something the entire evening has been pointing toward. In forest tradition monasteries in Southeast Asia, the nighttime soundscape is shaped by the surrounding forest in ways that have no equivalent in urban or even suburban monastic settings. The insects of the tropical night produce a continuous, layered sound of considerable complexity, not noise in the sense of interference, but sound in the sense of information. Monks who meditate through the night hours in these environments describe a quality of relationship with the natural world that the formal meditation hall cannot produce, because the formal meditation hall controls and simplifies the environment in the service of focus, while the forest at night offers an environment that is complex and alive and entirely indifferent to the practitioner's agenda. That indifference, the forest's complete lack of interest in whether the practitioner is comfortable or productive or successfully achieving anything, is understood in the forest tradition not as hostility, but as a teaching of considerable value. The world does not organize itself around the practitioner's requirements. It is simply happening, richly and continuously and without remainder. And the practice is not to stand apart from it and observe it, but to discover the quality of awareness that can be fully present within it without being swept away. The monastery at full night, its lights mostly dark, its corridors empty and quiet, its meditation hall holding only the occasional monk who has chosen to sit through the final hours before dawn, is as close as the built human world comes to the silence of a natural landscape. Not because it has eliminated the human from itself, but because it has organized the human in such a way that the human does not obstruct what was here before the human arrived. The stone of the walls, the wood of the floors, the darkness that has been the default condition of this place far longer than any lamp has been burning within it. And the monk who lies down in the final hour of the night, the breath slowing, the awareness softening at its edges, the day's practice settling into whatever the body and the mind will make of it in the hours of rest, is resting inside that darkness, not as something alien, but as something long familiar. As a condition they have been learning, for all the years of their practice, to inhabit without resistance, without urgency, without the need for it to be other than exactly what it is. The bell that will sound before dawn, calling them back to the surface of the day, is already resting in the silence, patient, unhurried, waiting for the particular moment that has been waiting for it. As we come gently to the end of our time inside the monastery's evening, let all of it settle for a moment before it fades. We have moved through the full arc of a monastic night, from the first bell that draws the boundary between the working day and the sacred hours, through the chanting halls where voices gather at the close of an afternoon and offer something back to the silence from which the day was drawn. We watch the butter lamps being lit and tended, their small flames casting warm, shifting light across painted walls as the world outside the monastery withdrew into its own quiet. We sat in meditation halls where the evening session deepens what the morning began, and we moved along stone paths worn smooth by years of slow, deliberate footsteps, where walking and stillness are understood as the same practice in different postures. We spent time in the particular quality of the great silence, that long inhabited quiet stretching from the evening service until the following morning's chanting. And we felt something of what that silence offers when the mind has finally exhausted its commentary and found what was underneath it all along. We sat outside the dokusan room with monks waiting their turn to bring whatever they have genuinely understood into the presence of someone whose longer practice allows them to see it clearly. We watched bodies lower themselves to the ground and rise again 108 times in the particular gesture of release that the body makes when it is asked to mean something. And we lay down finally in the lion's posture with the breath moving slowly and the awareness softening at its edges into whatever the night holds and offers and quietly knows. What runs beneath all of it, the way water runs beneath stone, is a single understanding that the evening is not the day's remainder. It is not what is left over when the important work has been completed. It is itself a form of the important work, perhaps the most important, the long, unhurried practice of learning to set things down, the bowl cleaned and returned to its place, the lamp extinguished with the same attention with which it was lit, the day received in full and then, completely and without reservation, released. There is something in this that asks nothing dramatic from us tonight. No commitment, no transformation, no requirement to become something other than what we already are. It only suggests, as the monastery has been suggesting across 2,500 years of practice, that what is available in the quietest hours of a day has always been available, that the stillness is not something produced by the practice. It is something the practice reveals, something that was here before the first bell sounded and will be here after the last one fades. If these slow evenings with the sleepy mind bring you something worth returning to, you are warmly welcome to leave a like, or to subscribe, or to share a quiet thought in the comments below. It helps more tired and curious people find their way here, one soft night at a time. This channel exists because of the people who find something in these unhurried journeys worth coming back to. And if sleep has not yet arrived, there is another door waiting on the screen. Another quiet world, ready to receive you whenever you are ready to enter. But if your eyes are already heavy, let them close. Let the monastery fade the way a butter lamp fades when the oil is spent. Not suddenly, not with any drama, simply a gradual diminishing of the light, the flame growing smaller and smaller, and then releasing itself into the dark without resistance and without loss. Let your shoulders drop toward the surface beneath you. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands rest exactly where they are, without needing to hold anything, without needing to prepare for anything that has not yet arrived. The evening is complete. Whatever it contained, whatever the day before it contained, all of it has been received and can now be set down. The great silence has arrived. The lamps are low. The stone paths are empty. Somewhere in the meditation hall, a single candle is still burning, as it has burned on many thousands of evenings before this one, and will burn on many thousands of evenings after. It does not require your attention. It simply continues, quietly and without effort, the way the breath continues. Let yours continue now. Sleep well and good night.